when it comes to the kinds of foods to avoid or lean into when dieting for fat loss, what are the things that you think people often overlook? What are the things that are unnecessarily demonized? Where should people be putting their attention? What's the best food groups to make fat loss easy?
Yep. Raspberries are great. Blueberries will kill you and they're terrible. Next question. As far as specific foods, short of like eating soap or poison, there are really no individual foods that are bad for you. And there are no individual foods that stall fat loss. There have been foods historically that have been demonized, not as individual foods. All of them have gone through the ringer at least once, but food groups. Sugars. People will say sugars are bad for you. It's just categorically false to say that. Sugars aren't bad for you. Sugars are no more prone to adding body fat or making body fat loss any more difficult. It's a non-starter. In direct evidence, in theory, the whole gamut. Nowadays, it's fun to poke fun at sugar and at carbs. Back in the 80s and 90s, if you told someone you were health conscious and then you put butter on something, they were like, listen, you're going through some psychiatric problems. We should probably get you checked into a center. Because you were delusional. Because everyone knew that saturated fat especially just straight up killed you where you stood. And you were never going to get lean eating a diet high in fats. They were also wrong. Calorie balance is so king that it doesn't discriminate hardly at all among food groups, fats versus carbs, none of that. So the myths of fats are too high or carbs are too high or sugars are too high, they're just that, myths. However, a very important thing to consider is the palatability of your food and the fullness factor your food gives you, because hunger's a real thing. So, you want to choose food when you're dieting for fat loss, creating a caloric deficit that does at least two things for you. One, it's not so damn delicious that you just want to eat more and more of it. And if you don't, you're just suffering. Like if you were deep into a fat loss diet, and I was like, hello, Chris, would you like a Cheeto? You'd be like, don't. Why? Because as soon as one of them Cheetos hits your lips, paradise. Purple angels flying around. It's better than acid at that point. You just want another Cheeto. So if you're on a fat loss diet, something bodybuilders discovered a long time ago, and a gentleman named, I'm going to butcher his name for sure, Stefan Guyenet, he says pronounced like DNA. I would just say Guyenet because I'm American. Woo! He, I believe, coined the term, or at least exposed the public to it, of something called the food palatability reward hypothesis. Properly couched as a hypothesis, so he's
not
really the fucking man.
Okay.
And it basically says something baffling when you think about it. It's ultra simple and explains most of the variants we've already talked about with obesity. When food is really tasty, people tend to eat more of it and they get fat. And they just want more. And if you have tasty food, but you've relegated yourself willpower style, like a good person, to not eating it, you're just going to be more miserable. You ever smell cheeseburgers being made while you're in the single digits body fat? You're like, dude, if there was an entire family of people between me and those cheeseburgers, like, I don't insert politically.
Boom, boom, boom.
Shoot them. I'm going to eat my way through them to the cheeseburgers.
Yeah, sorry.
So things that get taken out in editing.
I went Native American there.
My man.
Yeah.
So basically, if you're dieting for fat loss, try to have foods that aren't like exotically delicious. Veggies, fruits, whole grains, lean meats, not a ton of sauces, not a crazy ton of flavor. And here's the really fucked up part. It's going to be completely counterintuitive. What do you want when your body is telling you, listen, you need to put the fat back on? You want exactly the food that you shouldn't be having. So it's kind of like abstaining from jerking it or something, where it's like, what do you really want to do? You're like, I want to jerk it. Like, what are you not supposed to be doing? Not supposed to jerk it. Right. But if you can eat at home, if you can clear all of your shelves at home of junk and just have that lower palatability food, first of all, if you're hungry enough, that shit tastes real good. Plain chicken and broccoli tastes amazing if you're actually hungry. have that stuff. That's really, really awesome to do. And secondly, you want to have food that keeps you fuller for longer. Food with a lot of fluid volume, food with a lot of fiber, food that takes longer to digest. Minimally processed fruits, veggies, whole grains, lean meats, and healthy fats are just kind of undefeated in that category. And so for the calories you're allowed to have, it's a lot of food. It's not ultra tasty, so you kind of feel like you're laboring through it. You halfway through your meal, you don't even want anymore. You're stuffing yourself, and every week you're losing weight. Paradise. You're really doing it.
But it's not paradise because you're going through this boring diet. It doesn't taste as nice as it could be. Dr. Mike's told me that I can't, the exact thing I want to do, which is to make this tiny morsel, scrap of food. Please, sir, can I have some more?
So you can turn dial it to go, okay, I'm going to make my food a little tastier and a little less voluminous, a little less filling, such that I like my food. I can finish it. I look forward to it. But at the end of the meal, I'm like, ooh, okay, this is tough to finish. And it keeps me full long enough until my next meal comes around. I'm like, yeah, I can eat. Instead of like 2 hours before my next meal, I'm like, okay, where's the food? Where's the food? I'm losing it. As you progress through a diet, it's possible to start with pretty normal food and turn dial that food palatability down and that fullness factor up such that you finish your diet with quite different foods than you started. But the entire time your perception and relation to food is basically the same. You adjust to your preferences. Now that works really well.
Can you give some tactical examples of good switches from food types that people may be cooking with at the moment, maybe using more typically, and you saying more voluminous, more full of water, more insoluble fiber, etc. What are some of the easy switches? Let's get rid of this. Let's put some of these in.
Yep. Couple examples. Creamy sauces to non-creamy sauces to dry rubs to salt only when you're real miserable. Tons of rice and pasta and breads, down to whole grain breads, whole grain pasta, brown rice. Like it's funny. You go to a sushi place and it's like option for brown rice sushi. And I'm like, the Japanese people did not suffer for this abomination. What the hell is that even? So you go from that to reducing your grain intake more, expanding your fruit intake, and eventually expanding your veggie intake. If you have 50 grams of carbs to eat and it's all white rice, that's like a little bit more than a cup of white rice. At the beginning of a fat loss diet, shit, you're barely finishing that. I'll actually complete the analogy for you. You got some rice and you got some Japanese mayo on that shit. So goddamn good. I'm balls deep into a diet, so this is incredibly difficult for me to talk about. You go a couple more weeks, now it's the same white rice, but now you have like you sprinkled some some kind of seasoned salt on it. It's tasty, but it's no more Japanese mayo time because you could just like put that IV into your blood at that point. Then, and you have a little bit of veggies on the side next to it. You go to taking that rice and turning it to brown rice, but now it's not that whole scoop of brown rice, it's half a scoop of brown rice and way more veggies and even a couple slices of fruit. Still weeks later, you don't have any more rice. You have a bunch of veggies and a ton of fresh fruit. I mean, you're like stuffing it in because like, holy crap, like if you get a whole thing of strawberries, that's like 30 grams of carbs. Like how many fucking strawberries do I have to eat to get to this thing? Whereas like one, like you take a swig of sweetened condensed milk and it's like, boom, that's 50 carbs. Like what? How? So eventually you might get to a point where most of your carbohydrate consumption comes from a combination of fresh fruits and green veggies. And that's going to be insanely difficult to out-eat your calorie goals. Or to put another way, you're going to eat your meals and you'll be like, I don't want any more chicken, broccoli, and orange slices. I'm good until the next meal. And you have it again. And then when you end your diet and you start coming back up to maintenance, you slowly reverse that process back out again.
So you are using a restriction in the types of foods that you are allowed to eat in an attempt to pad out the satiety that you have by making it increasingly calorie sparse per gram of food, fewer calories, and to increase suffering, to make it hurt more?
You're trading off two different kinds of suffering. There's the suffering of having to eat food you're not amazed with, and there's the suffering of actual hunger. They don't compare in magnitude. It's a stupid analogy offhand is the annoyance of having to wear a sticky, gross, sweaty helmet versus taking it off in combat.
Mhm.
Yeah, it sucks,
Mhm.
but there's bullets flying.
The alternative
Put your helmet on.
is way worse.
100%.
What about potatoes? You mentioned about vegetables there. A lot of people, that's sort of starch, that is a big satiating thing. I certainly know that when I've been dieting previously, that's one of the things that I miss a lot. There's no amount of ground beef at 97.3 and whatever else that I can throw on a plate with some vegetables. That, like, I just want a little bit of starch. How can people get that if they think it's really, that's my thing? It just makes my diet easier. Where would you go to for that more starchy stuff?
So what you have to do is you can do an experiment on yourself. For any given number of grams of carbohydrates, which starch choices for you do you find the tastiest, the most difficult to stop eating, the most difficult to understand that, okay, now you've run out of pasta, don't get any more, and also the longest window after the meal of keeping you full. On average, boiled potatoes do really well in that regard. Mashed potatoes, not as well. They're tastier. You can suck them down faster. A bunch of different types of potato, the more minimally processed, the less processed, the better, do super well. Typically, rice does okay, but you can put away a lot of rice. Pasta generally doesn't do that great. I can make fields of pasta disappear by just breathing it in. So not everyone's the same.
Yep.
So you want to try it and figure out, but generally speaking, from memory, potatoes on average rank pretty high in the
good
fullness
satiety
index.
Yeah. In other news, this episode is brought to you by 8 Sleep. I have been using my 8 Sleep mattress for years, and I literally cannot imagine life without it. Having a actively cooled and heated mattress is the game changer. Now they've launched their newest generation pod, the Pod 4 Ultra. The Pod 4 Ultra can cool down each side of the bed up to 20 degrees below room temperature, keeping you and your partner cool. And for those of you who snore heavily, it can detect your snoring and automatically lift your head a few degrees to improve your airflow and stop it. This is year 3000 stuff. It cools, it heats, it elevates, and it is clinically proven to give you up to 1 hour more of quality sleep every night. Best of all, they ship to the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Europe, and Australia. You can get $350 off the Pod 4 Ultra by going to the link in the show notes below or heading to 8sleep.com/modernwisdom and using the code modernwisdom at checkout. That's EIGHTSLEEP.com/modernwisdom and modernwisdom at checkout. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that clip with Mike, you will love the full-length 2.5-hour episode where we break down everything you need to know about fat loss right here. Go on. That's it.